So Doug, I want to talk to you about your latest book, Drug Lord, and how it ties into the current opioid crisis, which is deemed as national emergency in the US. So what are your thoughts?
It's a tempest in a teapot. On the one hand, the fact that a lot of people like to take opioids is a sign that a lot of people are in pain, but it's not so much physical pain, it's psychological pain. It's like they're trying to blur reality because they're unhappy with the state of their lives in the world. But this thing about redoubling the drug war against opioids, it's ridiculous. It's counterproductive. I'm of the opinion that all drugs should be completely legal because the FDA, for instance, which has been in charge of this, they're not the friend of the average person. The FDA kills more people in a typical year than the Defense Department does in a decade. Meanwhile, masquerading is something that helps people. They just raise the costs of medications, slow down medical technology, and they're in the pocket of the big drug companies. This whole thing is nonsense. You know, in the years before the Harrison Act was passed, which illegalized narcotics like opium and cocaine, you could buy opium and cocaine at your corner drugstore. Anybody could, a kid. And there was no problem. There were people that had psychological issues. You're always going to have a certain percentage of them, but it wasn't the kind of nonsense that we have today. So I could go on about this, but one of the things I talk about in the novel, Drug Lord, is that one of the main problems, it's not the drugs themselves, it's the government's reaction to it. Putting half of the people that are in prisons today are there because of drugs.
Well,
it's insane.
How about the idea that, and the argument that if you do make drugs, all drugs legal, parents will have access to it, which will make kids have more access to it, and it's dangerous. What's your thought to that?
I would say au contraire. Look, this is a matter of personal responsibility. And when you treat people like children and say, this is illegal, you can't do it, it makes them more irresponsible. And from a moral, from an ethical point of view, your primary possession is your own body. And if you can't control your own body, then you're basically a slave. And entirely apart from that, we're talking about opiates again. Can people get addicted to them? Well, I just had a knee replacement, and I only took a small portion of the oxycodone that my doctor prescribed. So of course I experimented to see what's in it for people.
Of course you experimented.
Of course, and it's an interesting, warm feeling that you feel like you have nothing to worry about and so forth. But I'm not an addictive personality, and it's not a problem. A few people, but look, you can become addicted to food, or sugar, or tobacco, or alcohol, or sex. You can become addicted to anything. So the fact that the government is extending this criminally stupid war with opiates being the focus now, it's actually insane.
Well, one of the things I was actually reading this morning is that they're going to basically extend this national emergency on the opioid crisis again and again. Obviously, you think that's the wrong thing to do. So what would be your solution if you were, say, president?
Look, to legalize all drugs. Now, marijuana has been a bugaboo for many years, and the fact that it's been illegal has made it like the forbidden fruit where a lot of kids want to try it because it's illegal and so forth. If it's just something that you buy at a corner store, the way you buy a candy bar, and sugar is probably more dangerous, way more dangerous than marijuana is, it wouldn't have the attractiveness. And furthermore, when you illegalize a drug, you make it hugely profitable for people to get in there and push it. If a drug is cheap as a food, well, there's no profit in trying to sell it the way there is today with the huge profits by making it illegal, if I'm being clear about that. So my argument is one of morality as to who owns your body. It's one of who owns your body. It's one of personal responsibility. It's one of economics. No, the drug war is completely insane. These dangerous agencies like the DEA, and eventually, just like all government agencies, are eventually captured by the industry they regulate. And I don't doubt that there are many, many, many hundreds of DEA agents that have very large retirement accounts that were funded by the people they're regulating, which is to say the drug cartels. The whole thing is screwed up from top to bottom. So those are a couple of the themes that we cover in a lot of detail in Drug Lord. Yeah.
Well, let's move on to talk about what you'll be discussing here at New Orleans. You're going to be talking about the collapse of the Western civilization. Why this conference? In a room full of investors, are you sharing this?
Increasingly in today's world, it's impossible to invest. It's only possible to speculate. Why is this? Because these central banks all around the world, not just the Federal Reserve here, but in China, in Europe, in Japan, they are creating new currency units by the trillions. It's creating huge distortions in the market so that it becomes harder and harder to invest. And I'm talking about the problems with Western civilization, the collapse of it, here at this conference, because you can't invest in a collapsing civilization. In other words, at this point, my feeling is that the West is at the same stage that the Roman Empire was in the mid-4th century. It's falling apart at the seams, where people actually in the colleges, in media, everywhere are saying Western civilization is a terrible thing. It's a white patriarchy. We've got to abolish it. We've got to be multicultural. You know, these people are termites. They're cockroaches. They're dry rot that are destroying Western civilization, which is actually the only civilization that amounts to a hill of beans in the world's history. I mean, Western civilization is responsible for the concepts of individualism, of free thinking, of free speech, of free thought, of capitalism, of science, of rationality, in addition to all the art and literature and music in the world today.
Right.
So that's my feeling about Western civilization.
Well, let's say the Western civilization did collapse. Who do you believe, or what sort of power in the world do you believe will be the next leader?
Oh, there's no question that from an economic and other points of view, China is on the way up. They're absolutely on the way up. The U.S. is on the way down. Europe is a totally sinking ship. I mean, one of the big things that's going to happen over the next couple of generations is you're going to find millions, scores of millions of people from south of the Sahara, from Africa, that are going to be literally invading Europe as migrants. That's going to happen. Another thing that's going to happen is China, which is going to keep expanding and becoming much more powerful economically and in other ways, is going to take over Africa. This is going to be the 21st century, which we're now embarked upon, is going to be wild and crazy.
Right. What do you think we're going to be discussing next time we meet around this time? Maybe like an important event that you can predict for us?
Predictions are cheap, but what I try to do is I try to put my money on the line whenever I make a prediction. I was predicting Trump was going to win, which was a long shot, and I made bets on that and won. What's going to happen this time next year when we're speaking? We are in a stock market bubble. We're in a bond market hyper bubble. The gigantic financial storm that we entered in 2007, we've been going through the eye of the storm because all of these governments have been creating trillions of new currency units. I think we're going to go into the trailing edge of the storm, and it's going to be much worse and much longer lasting and much different than what we had in 2008 and 2009. So if we talk again a year from now, call me on that, and let's see if I'm right. But then again, you know, it's such
Who knows what could happen?
Anything could happen, but there's really tough times coming.
And I know you're not a fan of paper currency, so are you someone who is a big believer in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin?
Listen, somebody gave me my first Bitcoin, physical. They exist. Back when it was about $13, and he explained it to me, but it didn't click to me the value of cryptocurrencies and what's the value of them. And it says a transfer mechanism. So you don't have to use the banking system, you don't have to use the SWIFT system, and especially for people in the third world who can only save and transact in worthless currencies like pulas and kwaches and things like that, they're all going to go to Bitcoin and other cryptos in the future. So it's a bubble now with Bitcoin at 5,500 or whatever it is. But I think the bubble's going to get bigger, and eventually it's going to blow up. I mean, eventually it's going to be Bitcoin 2.0, then what do you do with your Bitcoin 1.0? There are problems.
Right, of course.
But it's a marvelous thing, the cryptocurrencies, and I think that the governments of the world are moving rapidly to come out with their own fiat cryptocurrencies. I wouldn't use them, I'd use the private ones for lots of reasons. But yeah, this is a very big deal.
All right.
Although I'm basically a believer in gold.
Of course.
The only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability.
Well, thank you so much for your insight, Doug.
Pleasure talking to you, Rachel.